Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Dennis Romero joining us, the founder and lead practitioner with Vanguard SMP. We're talking about this amazing business that he's taught me so much about with his artistry and, of course, micropigmentation, and how he's helping so many people get their self-confidence back, get the way they look back. It's so important to men and women out there. Would you mind introducing yourself to our listeners today?
Yes, I am Dennis with Vanguard SMP, and we specialize in scalp micropigmentation as a permanent solution for hair loss.
Yes, and by the way, the work that you're doing is fascinating. It's I've seen it. I want our viewers to see it. It's night and day how you're changing, the scalp of so many, in a sense, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because that's what it is, right? It's just creating an illusion on the scalp that makes people look like they have a full head of hair, that makes them feel a hell of a lot better about themselves, right? That's essentially what we do, in addition to other services that we could touch on, a little later.
And you wanted to dive into the scalp today, in a sense, right? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the scalp is a tricky surface to work on because everybody's skin is so different. And, there's different discrepancies in age, in like things like sun damage, all of those factors like really determine like how you're going to adjust so that the person ends up with the best possible result, right? That's what you have to do. And that's what you have to learn in time. But ultimately it's worth it because they do end up in a much better place.
Aw, and you know what? It's so amazing because so many people are using SMP, and he said it's very popular in culture right now. And people may not even be aware of the people who have it, but everyone's doing it. Could you share a little bit about what it is specifically and how you're really creating those natural results?
So most people are unaware when someone's had it done, if they've had it done right, because you can't really detect it. Does that make sense? You only gawk at the helmet. When a guy walks in with a solid helmet on his head, then obviously that's not the way it's supposed to look like. It's supposed to be undetectable. And as far as the artistry of it goes, it really is specific to each artist because we're all doing the same thing, but there are differences in our approach and how we execute it and how we like the finished product to look, right? So you want to pick someone, if you are a potential client, that aligns their style aligns with what you're looking for. Yeah, so it's just a lot of different things that you can apply, right? Because you can use the needle, use the machine in a different way. If I angle the machine a certain way, it's going to create a certain pattern of impressions, right? So when you're trying, it's important to have those skills because you can then nuance and fine-tune the treatment just the way you want to your particular style, right? I have a very improvisational style. So I like to, I don't like to just make perfect little impressions like a little dot maker, right? I like to create texture. And for that reason, I use different approaches and I use different techniques in terms of how I hold the machine and how I apply it to the skin so that the result is what I think is the best for the client and just, in line with my particular style.
And what is your particular style, can we say?
So basically, when you see work from different SMP artists, you can see work that is both, high level work, top shelf work, but it will look different because there's certain people who are much more structured in the way they do it. And so they make impressions they're like little perfect dot makers, right? And for that reason, it's going to have a different finish than the way I do it because I like to improvise and I like to blend different impression, making styles, making techniques so that it creates more texture. It looks more realistic, in my opinion. Although I would say that the people that I described before, the people who are perfect little dot makers, also execute fantastic treatments. It's just a matter of what you want. I can do a treatment like that if it's requested from me, but naturally I'm inclined to kind of do it my own way in terms of how I mix the colors, which most people don't, because I think that the more that you tailor it to the client, the better the outcome, right? So for that reason, like I take my own approach and I like to experiment, so long as I said last time that it doesn't compromise the overall outcome of the treatment. I'm learning. And at the same time, like they're getting the benefit of that learning from my experimentation.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And, as, an expert in your field, and you have many years of, experience under your belt, and I know you're training so many technicians working underneath you. Just tell me exactly where, specifically in Florida are you, and the other office locations too?
Yeah, so I am in Orlando. We are in Tampa. We are in Silver Springs, Maryland. We are in Vegas, Nevada, and we are in Los Gatos, California.
Wow. Talk about building client relationships. Clearly, you've done a good job at that. And I know you want to touch upon that. And, the part of it is building those relationships, which you clearly have done.
Well, I mean, yeah, because again, like everyone has their own style, even when dealing with clients, right? Like your sales process and your consultation process. All of those are opportunities to build relationships. And what that does, some advice for new technicians, be personable, be empathetic, because when you connect to the client and they feel seen, they feel heard, and they feel safe, it tends to make them attached to you in a certain way, right? Because you're helping them. And this is over the course of almost like maybe a month and a half to 2 months that you spend with this person until the treatment is complete. And so if you build that rapport, if you build that relationship, one, you're going to have reoccurring revenue because they're going to come back to you, right? And two, it'll be reflected in things like your reviews, because the person will, if that comes to mind when they are writing your review, and it usually does because it's left an impression, that will also be reflected in your reviews, your reputation, and your rapport with your clients. And so like to build relationships it's critical. It's critical right from the very beginning. It's critical because people feel safer with you. They know that you can execute the work the way that they want it once they're completed, and they will remember that and they will come back to you. Like I have people come back to me from out of state. I had a student come to me from New Zealand, right? So people will travel if they feel connected to you and if they feel like you have their best interest at heart and you actually care about what's happening to them. So relationship building for me is one of my top priorities because, it's the reason my clients love me.
I love it. Well, you also got a great personality, and you also go by the books, but you have to. And that's another thing, the regulation, right? And also with safety practices. Could you share how you are trained and, how compliant you and your staff are?
Right. Well, I mean, every state has its own regulations. So we are completely compliant with the regulations and expectations of the state of Florida to operate a business like ours. It varies from state to state. And so therefore it is the potential client's job, and homework to do their due diligence and research the artist that they're considering, because some states have very little regulation, right? Like the state of Florida has very little regulation, and therefore there are pitfalls for potential clients because there's no regulation. My grandma could do this, in 2 weeks if she took an online class, because there is very little oversight in the state of Florida. Some have more strict regulations, but it's still like in that middle ground where it's still considered tattooing, right? But because it is enhancing the overall appearance of clients who feel very self-conscious about where they are in their physical appearance, it's important to take all of those things into consideration.
Yeah, and let me ask, you've been doing this for quite some time, and you've learned the secret to success. I mean, to have multiple practices, to grow so large at such a young age, you're doing something right, clearly a lot. And also, how does marketing play in your role, and especially with social media today, with, as a business owner, and to those out there who may be, interested, like, tell me about the marketing process as well.
So the marketing is critical, right? Because most people that pivot into something like this oftentimes come from jobs that were completely different. They were not artistic. It was a very they could be a plumber, they could be a landscaper. Sometimes I've had people, who have much higher positions but just don't want to do it. I was training a nurse anesthetist, right? Because they were tired of it and they wanted to transition into something that could potentially create even more revenue than the job they had. So they're all over the place, basically. But what I try to tell them is that you must be willing to invest in your business, because just taking the course is only the beginning, right? Like, you have to practice beyond that. And then when you're ready to move forward with your own practice, you have to invest in marketing like you would invest in any business, right? You cannot expect to open a business with just taking one class on the application of SMP and expect to be like the next SMP celebrity, right?
Yes.
And most people are most apprehensive about that investment because there are no guarantees. There are risks, right? And you have to kind of go through those stumbling blocks and you kind of have to walk the fire, because again, if you are apprehensive and you are reluctant to take on that challenge of, finding the proper marketing, you're not going to do well, because there are already so many established clinics who are running campaigns and ads, and they will drown you out. You know what I'm saying? There are exceptions of people who have pounded the pavement and made it, but that is the exception. And you don't want to be the statistic, right? You're hoping that you're the exception, but why would you want to thread such a fine opening in a needle, right? Because it's going to be more difficult for you. It's important that every person that gets into any business, especially scalp micropigmentation, is aware that it's going to require some financial investment, right, as any business does, in order for you to be successful. Because in absence of that, it's very, 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 very difficult. And that's the hardest thing for me to get through to clients, because of the apprehension, because of the fear, right? And there's nothing I can do about that. But for people who are considering it, I would really, really, really start circling that if you don't have that component, you're going to struggle. Just pull the trigger on the marketing, because that's what happened to me. My first few months of opening, traffic completely slowed down, and I had a marketing company, right? But they didn't necessarily have the background in representing businesses like me. So I had thousands of dollars leaving and nothing coming in, and a big oh shit moment, right? Okay, so what now, right? After I, stop pulling out my hair and rolling around on the floor and crying because I'm going under, you know what I mean? But yeah, it's so important. It's so important to just stay the course, and just you have to be consistent, and you just have to have the moxie to actually take on the challenge. I don't want to dissuade people from doing it, but I want them to have a clear understanding of the emotional, mental, financial investment that's going to be required to get the business off the ground.
Got it. Wow. All right. Well, at this time, let's remind everyone how we can reach out to you. And of course, we'll continue the conversation if someone does have any questions. And do you offer a complimentary consultation? How does that part work?
Yeah, so consultations are free. They're just basically informational, right? The client, and we give them the information. We send them on their way. We're not car salesmen. We don't hound people. We basically just present the information and determine whether they are a good candidate or not for the process. And and then it's absolutely free. So yeah, it's really made convenient for them, and they don't have to worry about incurring any fee just for collecting the information. Yeah, so yeah, that's the way that we do it. What was the other part of your question?
Well, how we can contact you specifically for a consultation. It would be.
So Vanguard SMP, right? The website is www.vanguardsmp.com, and it's Vanguard SMP across all social platforms. So you should find us pretty easily. Yeah. Once you type in Vanguard SMP, we are the only Vanguard SMP. So you're going to get us. Yeah.
Perfect. And how has, the process developed over the years? You've been doing this for many years, right? Is it still really the same techniques being used? Is it just maybe like a different process? Or because I know you are so good at what you do, not saying no one else is, but you have that experience and you use different colors and different, compared to someone who might just do like a matte finish with like just browns, but you might be like brown, highlight this, like, do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
What, tell me a little bit about the process.
Yeah. So, basically the process is, I think if it's going to be, professional high level SMP, I think that the person has to be able to apply many, many different things. And I think at the beginning, because it was so new, it was still trial and error, right? So they were using black ink that was diluted across the board for all clients, right? So if they use the same ink on your skin tone in comparison to someone who's African American, there is a high risk that your treatment or her treatment may not come out right because you're using the same product and the same ink, which was black, for everyone else. Yes, you dilute it at different levels, right? You would have a high dilution because you're very fair skinned. The person of darker skin would have lesser dilution because you need it to be more concentrated for it to show up on the skin, right? So that's a really important component, and it's basically changed around the margins, right? And that's how most industries change, right? It's small incremental building to a better place, right? And that's really what it is. So, for example, like I started off just using black, and you can be successful just using the black. But what the problem is that for people who are new, it's risky. Okay, it's risky because you're not really nuancing the pigment and the ink in a very detailed way that's going to lead to a better outcome. It's a one size fits all. And because you're still on that learning curve, the risk for creating errors and potentially botching someone are much greater, right? So I incorporated color because I understood that there are so many discrepancies between people in terms of their skin color, their hair color, their eye color, and just the texture of their skin itself and the undertones that exist under the skin. And so a real comprehensive understanding of color theory is critical, even though the industry is still begrudgingly not wanting to move quickly in that direction, right? But because, like I said, I like to experiment, I'm doing one of these. Like, I'm a chemist. Like, I want to get to the,
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So when you push that way, you are only going to improve around the margins. But I think that that's worth it because it's still improving. Does that make sense? You're still pushing the industry and the process forward in a way that in the future, even though incremental, is going to leave clients in a much, much better place. And the realism that you will be able to achieve will be far greater than if you do a one size fits all.
Amazing. And by the way, I want to point out another thing that you do with the micropigmentation. If you are new to this conversation, I don't think we discussed it yet, but the scar camouflaging on top of it all. Wow. Could you share a little bit about that? Because a lot of people come into you with scars. Could you share a little bit about the background on that?
Right. The majority of scars are usually from men who have had transplants, sometimes multiple transplants, and the transplant failed because they continue to lose hair. All of the transplanted hair didn't stick. Some of it dies when it's moved, right, because it goes into shock. And for that reason, they're left in kind of no man's land where they still feel bald up top, even after the transplant, right? And then in addition to that, they have that scarring in the back of the head, which is sometimes really severe. And the workmanship of the surgeon is critical because, the stitching, like the finish that they give the scar once they're stitching it up, if it's sloppy, if it's not detailed, if the surgeon was just lazy for whatever reason or just not skilled in doing that, it leaves the scar with like bumps and some sunken areas. And it just looks like a messy scar that was sewn up, pretty badly. So that, in my opinion, because I like improvisation, I feel like is the best approach to take. That's why it takes longer, and new technicians should never take on that type of scarring, right? Because they're just not ready for it. Just learn to tattoo healthy skin before you tattoo scarring, traumatized skin, because it's going to be more challenging, right? So scars create irregular, inorganic shapes in the back of the head, right? So because I don't always use perfect little impressions and dots to execute my treatments, right? Because I improvise, that helps me like greatly because every scar is different, vastly different sometimes. And so you need to be able to improvise and implement that because everything is going to be different for each scar. And if you try to do it all the same, it would never work, right? Because you might have a scar that created an entirely different shape in the back of your head than the next person that has like 3 scars and it's a totally different pattern of scars, right? And then you have to deal with the dimensional aspect of the scar. Is it raised? Is it sunken? Is it flat? Does it have discoloration? Does it have hypo or hyperpigmentation, right? So an improvisational style when working with scars is not for everyone.
Okay.
But it's for me because it just gives me so much flexibility to attack the scar from many, many different angles and do it different and tailor it again to the client because I'm applying different ideas and techniques and approaches that I've tried in the past. And I like scars because they are challenging and because I think that we do some of the best work in the world on them.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And also, unfortunately, we're out of time, but we got a little bit of a late start. How do we want to kind of wrap up today's show and about why, obviously, we should reach out? And one quick question I had, though, was about upkeep, the process. I know it's an investment, but how long does it last for? And is there upkeep associated with this in the future?
There is upkeep only because it is a cosmetic tattoo, which is much more superficial body art. And that's what you want. You want it to slowly fade out over the course of 2 to 4 years, because then it's light enough where you can just reapply it through a touch-up, which is just one session, and give it that original pop, right? If you have SMP that does not lighten over the course of 2 to 4 years, you're probably going to run into a problem because somebody's going to apply more ink on top of it. And then it's going to continuously get darker. And that just means that it was implanted too deep and the technician was too aggressive. And then ultimately you're going to end up in a bad place because your skin can only hold so much ink before it looks oversaturated and highly unnatural, right? So you want it to last 2 to 4 years. You don't want it to last for 20 because then you have a helmet on your head.
Very true. Thank you so much for saying that, for being here, for giving us your honest opinion, about the work you're doing and clearly the lives that you're changing, men and women out there. Remind us how we can reach out to you one more time.
Yeah, it's www.vanguardsmp.com for the website, Vanguard SMP across all social platforms, and the number is 407-537-7129.
All right. Thank you so much, Dennis. Have a fantastic day, and we'll talk again soon, I'm sure. Thank you. This, I think, was our 3rd show or 4th show?
This is our
third. It's our what?
This is our 3rd.
All right.
This is our 3rd. Oh, yeah. Last week I was hacking up a lung because I had the flu. So,
well, I hope you're better now. Everyone.
Once I gave up that night and said, okay, this is not going to go away, I sent the email at 2 a.m. There is no way that I'm going to be able to talk to Jill and not have half of the conversation be a hacking call.
I get it. Glad you're healthy. It's going around. Thank you so much, Dennis. Have a fantastic day and feel good.
You too. I do. I feel fantastic. You have a great day too.
You sound it. You look it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Adopt US Kids presents Multiple Choice Parenting.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes?
How could he do this to you? And for Sheila, she has split ends.
B, console her?
Oh, sweetie, this is going to happen a lot. 4, maybe 5 more times before you get married.
C, take charge?
Got to get this all straightened out. Give a little talking to, man to man, mano a mano. Hey, Steve! Is now a good time? No? Okay, no problem. Bye.
Or D, help her find a new boyfriend?
I know a great place to meet boys. The internet. Nice, single boys. Never mind. How about some ice cream?
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
For more information on how you can adopt, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.